Hello and welcome. Today I want to discuss sealing threads again. I've made a few videos on this before. You can also find them by clicking the I above. But since most of my viewers are craftsmen or do-it-yourself enthusiasts, I want to show you a method that's not very well known, but in my opinion it should be in every do-it-yourselfer's toolbox. You know the usual method. For big projects, you always use traditional hemp to seal things. If you need to do it fast, use Teflon tape. What many of you don't have on your radar is a sealing thread. In my opinion, the sealing thread is the better solution for DIYers, for craftsmen, for quick repairs. What are the advantages of the sealing thread? You can see it. The sealing thread is packed here in such a compact package. That means you just put it in your toolbox, always have it at hand, and it basically lasts forever. In addition, the sealing thread has a big advantage over, for example, Teflon. When you use the sealing thread, it has similar properties to, for example, hemp. Because with Teflon tape, if you wrap something with Teflon tape, let's just say you seal it, you can't unscrew that connection anymore. That means if you turn it back even a little, it will immediately start leaking. The sealing thread is like hemp, but we can easily turn it back, which is a big advantage. That means we can maybe turn this connection back about 20 or 40 degrees, but definitely not more than 45 degrees. Then I would reseal it again. That's why sealing thread is the best option for craftsmen and DIYers, especially for small projects. Of course, if you want to rebuild your entire heating system, hemp is the better way to go. How do we start working with sealing thread? First of all, we have a thread here that we want to seal. Ideally, this thread is nice and clean, but usually that's not the case. Maybe you've unscrewed a pipe somewhere and then it sometimes looks like this. Of course, we can't seal something like that. That means these threads here first need to be properly cleared of the old hemp and thoroughly cleaned. That means it's best to use a wire brush to clean it out. And maybe if you have one, you can also use a spray cleaner to clean the surface. Another important step before we apply the thread sealing cord is preparing the thread. As you can see, this thread is already prepared, so we have some roughness here. If you've bought various threads or fittings, you might already have a roughened pattern like this on the threads. You don't need to do that here. But if, for example, the thread on this valve hasn't been roughened yet, I recommend that you lightly roughen the thread here. There are many ways to do this here. You could use a file. Some craftsmen simply use pliers by taking the pliers like this, placing them here and pulling them over the thread a bit. That's not a method I personally prefer. I prefer to take an old hacksaw blade like this and just scrape it over the thread. You see, this way we can roughen it up nicely, and we do this all around the entire thread. In the next step, we'll use the thread sealing cord. It comes in packaging like this. We have a thread up here that we can simply pull out, and here is a cutting mechanism that we can use to cut the thread to length. To apply the thread, I always recommend that beginners take a look at the thread. The thread has a running direction, a turning direction. This is a right-hand thread, but there are also left-hand threads for fuel gases. However, I have to mention here that laypeople should not tamper with fuel gas lines or gas lines in general. So here we have a right-hand thread. Just as we would screw on our connection, of course, we also apply our thread sealing tape here. This immediately raises the question, how many times do we need to wrap this thread sealing tape? There are several online tables for this, but I would use them cautiously. I usually rely on my experience for this, but I can show you a table as an example. Here you can see roughly how many times we should wrap this thread sealant around, depending on the thread size. Applying the thread sealant is pretty straightforward. We place the thread sealant on the thread and hold it in place here. I simply secure the thread here with my thumb and start winding the thread from the front in the direction of the thread. When we wind the thread like this, you can see that it automatically clamps the piece of thread we placed on the back of the thread. And this way we can make a few turns here. Once we've clamped the thread properly like this, we move on to simply winding the thread onto the thread. Here, I'm basically winding the thread once all the way around. That might not always be necessary. And once we've done that, I recommend that you don't just keep going like that, but instead wind the thread a bit crisscrossed, just like you see me doing here. How many times you wind this thread, I already showed you earlier in a table. As I said, that's also a certain level of experience that comes into play here. My motto, it's better to overwind than underwind. After applying the thread sealing cord, we cut it off. For this, we usually have a tool like this on the packaging, and that way we've already applied the thread sealing cord. Now we just need to tighten the connection and we can screw our threads together here. In this case, I want to screw on this faucet here. A very important tip at this point: often fittings made of brass are bought at the hardware store. Brass fittings are very sensitive. If you tighten them too much, they tend to break or develop micro cracks inside, which can cause them to become leaky later on. If you're working in heating construction, I recommend always using gunmetal parts here. These usually don't have those problems. Here's another tip. The Wycon sealing thread has a special feature. If we turn the Wycon sealing thread over, it has a roller on the underside. This contains a lubricant. You can also apply this lubricant to the thread. This makes it easier to tighten the connection. Now we simply screw this connection on by placing the fitting here, screwing it on, and then tightening it with an appropriate tool. The rule is after tight comes broken, so don't overdo it. And now I've just over tightened the valve a bit here, which means I've tightened it too much. And now I'll show you again the advantage of thread sealing tape, because here we have the option, just like with hemp, to make slight corrections and maybe turn the fitting back a little if needed. And that way we've aligned it perfectly. With regular Teflon tape, for example, that wouldn't have been possible anymore. Lastly, a key tip: if you need to seal something in plumbing or compressed air, I'll make another connection for you. We'll seal this with the thread sealing cord, which you've seen in other videos. You can find those by clicking the eye above. Here we can pressure test the system, which I recommend before adding water. I use compressed air for this, usually at 1.5 to 2 bar. This lets you optimally pressure test the system. Make sure to check the pipe and connection limits and never pressure test above those. Now I'll introduce a bit of air here, and that way we can let it sit for a while and see if the connection is really tight. In this case, we have a hard soldered connection, which I made with you in one of my previous videos. This connection should withstand at least 6 to 8 bar, so we've just applied a little over 6 bar here. And you can see everything is sealed here. There's no hissing, everything is nice and quiet around us. Alternatively, you can also use a Lexu spray here and check if everything is properly sealed. So we've already reached the end of the video and I've sealed my connection.